Howdy, you beautiful Bayou Bandits. This is going to be the ultimate boss guide for Hunt Showdown 1896. So if you guys are new to the game or just genuinely aren't super proficient in killing the bosses, then this is going to be the only video that you guys need going forward. I'll cover each boss's strengths and weaknesses and everything you might need to know in between. That being said, Twitch drops is going from June 18th to July 9th, so I will be streaming most of those days over on my Twitch. If you guys are interested in grabbing any of the drops up on screen right now, we'll show you all the pros and cons though to all of the streaming sites that I multi-stream to. And I would kindly like to ask if you guys could go drop a follow and support me over on Kick. I'm trying to get partnered, and Kick partners get paid hourly, so that would really help me in my content creation journey. And all you guys have to do is go follow and watch over there on Kick instead of the other two platforms. But here's all the pros and cons on screen now. If you guys like this type of content, don't forget to leave a like, comment, and subscribe, as I have a lot more of this planned for the near future. As well, if you want to go above and beyond, check out my Patreon. And if you want one-on-one coaching to improve your game in the Bayou, then check the link down below. With that being said, let's get into the video, and I'll see you in the Bayou. So let's talk about how to find the bosses before we even get to fight them. Essentially, you're going to want to find 3 clues or stumble upon the boss lair. Then that will narrow down your search to show you exactly where it is. Sometimes there is 2 bosses on the map, so there's different boss searches, and other times it's just one and a wild target or something like that. To find them, you're going to want to find 3 clues, and each compound is only going to have 1 other than 3 compounds per map. Each map has 3 compounds that possesses 2 clues for you to be able to pick up. However, depending on how the map grays out, it might not allow you to pick up both of those, and the gray out is essentially just eliminating options or compounds from the boss search, saying that, hey, there is no boss at this compound, so it grays out. But yes, for Lost and Delta, Stillwater Bayou, and DeSalle, all of these maps have the 3 compounds in a triangle around the middle of the map. On Mammon's Gulch, they are a triangle from the top middle of the map in the bottom left and bottom right. Those are the compounds that possess 2 clues. They spawn there every game, not in the same exact spot. They do move around a little bit, but they spawn 2 clues. And if the map allows you to, you can get both of them. To look for these clues, you're going to want to hold E to go into dark sight, and they will show up with a bunch of blue dots. Once you get close with it and interact with it, it will then gray out a little bit of the map, shortening or lessening your boss search, saying that these compounds are not going to be in the boss search, meaning the boss won't be there. Once you stumble upon the boss lair or ultimately get 3, it will finally reveal where the boss is. So now that you know how to find the boss targets, let's talk about all of the very proficient things to kill the bosses with that you might not normally have in your loadout. So starting off, let's go through the consumables, and I will handpick all of the good ones that you can get efficient use out of when killing bosses. The most notable one that will take away 75% of the boss's health is going to be the sticky bomb. This thing is a very effective consumable that you can just prime and then throw it to them, and it does what it says it does in the name. It sticks to them. It has a decent fuse, meaning it'll take a bunch of seconds to go off, and then once it does, it will take a lot of their health. However, if you want to one-tap a boss with an explosive, then you're going to want to go the big dynamite bundle. This thing is going to be very expensive, but if you can throw it next to the boss or directly at the boss and have it explode with them pretty much on top of it, it will take all of their health and essentially one-tap them. These are probably the 2 best consumables to use for killing bosses fast, but let's move on to some other things that can kill bosses very efficiently. Outside of those explosives, in my opinion, melees are going to be your best friend when it comes to fighting bosses. A lot of new players think that it's just okay to go around shooting the bosses, but depending on what you have, it can reveal to the nearby enemy players what guns you're using and that there is somebody in there in general, which both of those you don't really want them to find out until they get to the compound. And that shooting isn't really worth it, in my personal opinion, unless the boss is almost dead and you have enemy players moving close by, and you need to make sure that they are dead so you can then banish the boss as fast as possible. Other than that, you probably shouldn't be shooting your guns at the bosses. If you have a suppressor or something like that, then it's not that big of a deal. I will say make sure you're never shooting a shotgun at the bosses unless you desperately need to as well to finish it off to banish, because if enemy players hear that there's a shotgun in the boss lair, they will be more hesitant to move into the boss lair because they think that you're just going to sit there and hold a corner or something like that. However, they might not know that you have a shotgun if you are just fighting the boss with a melee. If everybody on your team is using a proficient melee, then you can take care of all the bosses in the game very quickly and efficiently. But let's talk about all of the melees and the differences between blunt damage, piercing damage, and rending damage, as well as all the useful melees in this game. So starting off with the in-world melees, these are going to be some of the most available ones that you can get, and they are going to work on almost every boss, each one of these. So we have the hammer, the axe, and then we have the pitchfork and the shovel. So like I said, let's talk about the different types of damages in this game. There is blunt damage, piercing damage, and rending damage. Blunt damage is going to be with the hammers in the game. It is going to be something that just hits it very hard, but doesn't actually pierce it or slash it. So hammers, dusters, those are going to be considered blunt, mainly because it doesn't have any sharp objects to make it bleed. And then the piercing damage is going to be from the pitchfork, which you can find in the world. And piercing essentially is just going to be any of your knives and things that directly stab into something. And I know I look kind of corny. Say it down in the comments. I know. And then rending is going to come from the axe. That is going to cause a bleed on the enemy that you are hitting, and is also going to slash instead of stabbing like the piercing damage does. You can find the hammer or the axe at any of the supply points on the map, unless it's the boat supply point. So just keep that in mind. If you're about to fight the boss and there's a supply point close, it might be worth checking out to see if you can get a hammer or an axe. And then there's a dynamic melee that can spawn in the map too. It's not as good as the other ones, but it does do rending and blunt damage, and that is the shovel. If you do a heavy attack, that is going to be considered blunt damage, and then if you do a light attack, it will be rending damage because it is going to be a slash and it is going to make enemies bleed. But all of these melees you can find in the game are very efficient when killing bosses, and each one is going to be better on another boss than it is with the others. Then let me go over all the melees you can bring in the game. First off, we have the katana, which actually is a 2-in-1. It has rending damage because it has a slashing attack if you sheath it with the martialist trait for 2 upgrade points. And it also has a piercing damage if you heavy attack with it. So the katana makes for an extremely good melee when fighting all of the bosses in the game because it has multiple different types of damages. Then we have the machete, which is exclusively a rending damage because it is a slash, which this works very good for most of the bosses as well. Definitely recommend this for a budget melee that can take down bosses effectively. We also have a combat axe, which replaces one of your weapon slots, but essentially just is the same as finding an axe in the match, but it is very good for killing certain bosses. We then have the saber, which is a piercing damage with its heavy attack. This is an underrated melee that you can bring in my personal opinion. And then lastly, for the melees that you can bring in, which actually is one of the best for a few of the bosses, that is going to be the railroad hammer. It used to not do a lot of damage, but a few updates ago, they buffed it, so it tanks bosses that is susceptible to blunt damage because it is a hammer. It is not going to pierce anything or cut anything. It is going to do blunt damage, and this is going to be very good for, like I said, those bosses that aren't going to do so well against blunt damage. Then the other melees on guns, let's just quickly explain which ones do what. Any of the talons on the guns are going to be rending because they are a slashing damage. Any of the traumas are going to be blunt because they are supposed to act like a hammer. Any of the bayonets are strictly going to be piercing damage because they stab. The claws on a few pistols are going to be piercing as well because they are stabbing. The brawlers on any of the guns are going to be blunt damage because they are essentially just hitting it. It's not going to cut or bleed anything. And then the riposte is going to be one of the melee options you can put on your guns that actually does rending and piercing. So you can heavy attack with a pierce for the riposte, or you can light attack for a rending damage. So this is actually pretty decent within bosses as well, because it has multiple different damages. And then for the tools, let's start with the dusters. These are going to be very bad for killing bosses because they're only blunt damage and they don't do a lot of HP. The knuckle dusters allows you to use 2 modes. If you light attack, it is going to use the dusters, and if you heavy attack, it will stab. So this is a good makeshift melee, I suppose, because it can deal blunt and piercing damage. However, it doesn't do a lot, so it's not going to be an amazing tool for killing bosses. Then we have the regular knife, which is a piercing damage, and it is pretty good for bosses. It's better than the other 2 that I just mentioned in my personal opinion. However, none of these melee tools that you can bring in are going to be super good at killing bosses. It's still going to take a good amount of time. And then we have the heavy knife, which is exclusively rending damage, which can do a good amount of damage to some bosses, but it's just like the knife, the dusters, and the knuckle knife, and that is not going to be super good at killing any of the bosses. Then we have the throwing melee tools you can bring in, and let's start with the knives. There's 8 of them, so they are pretty solid if you're throwing at the bosses with them from a distance. You can go retrieve all of them, and it's just constant pressure or damage that you're taking away from the bosses. So these are solid, but I don't recommend these if you want to get the boss down super fast, especially if you're playing by yourself. We have the throwing axes, which are actually very, very good at killing most of the bosses. I do recommend taking these anyways, and they can substitute not finding another good melee to kill the bosses down, even if you're solo. They're only really bad against one of the bosses. But the best melee tool that you can bring in to kill bosses is going to be the spears. A heavy attack with them will pierce, and you can constantly throw these at the bosses, pick them up, throw them. And since they are the biggest tool you can have, they are going to do the most damage when using them on bosses. However, they're still not as good as using any in-world melees or melees you might be able to bring in from the arsenal or put on to your gun. So I went over all the melees in the game and kind of explained which ones were good for killing bosses and which ones weren't, what type of damages they do, and things like that. Now let's talk about everything else you need to know about the bosses before we actually get into each specific boss. Something to mention is the fact that the banishment that comes from killing the boss is the most important part in this process when killing the boss. It is going to refill all of your health bars for your whole entire team. So one thing to know is that there's two different types of bosses. There are boss targets and wild targets. There are 4 different boss targets in this game and 2 wild targets. The boss targets are going to be in compounds and mainly in buildings inside the compounds, and the wild targets are usually going to be outside of compounds, or at least not in the traditional boss lairs. I will talk about the wild targets at the end of the video, so if you guys only want to see that, then go to this timestamp. So like I said, there are 4 different bosses in this game. We have the Butcher, the Assassin, the Spider, and SCRAPBEAK. And detection zone is when you go into dark sight, when you're inside of it, it will pulsate at the top left, white or red. White meaning that nobody is within that detection zone on the enemy teams, and red meaning that there is multiple teams in that zone. And the zone is usually within 50 meters of the middle of the boss lair that the boss is in. So this is definitely important for you guys to make sure you're checking when you are fighting the boss to make sure that it is white. And if it's red, it might be a good opportunity for you guys to either finish the boss if he's super low to make sure that the enemies don't get the banish instead of you, or you just back up and hold an angle, get ready for a fight, because there might not be enough time for you to take down the boss before the enemy teams push in and try and fight you. So just make sure you're checking this color while you are fighting the boss. So this can be another indication if you have been the first person there, but once they do their entry screech, this can be a good opportunity for you to throw your sticky bomb on them, throw your dynamite at them like we talked about earlier, or whatever you're going to do. This is a good little chance for you to go make some moves, potentially melee them in the process of their screech or whatever. But when they see you for the first time, they will do this screech. Some of them act a little differently with their entry screeches and aren't super available to be meleeed or whatnot, but I'll talk about that as well in a few minutes. So now you know how to find the bosses, what melees and tools you should be bringing to effectively kill them. I'll then talk about the boss health system, how to read their health, how to find out when they are getting enraged, and things like that right now. So if you look over here, all of the bosses have this health bar. The boss's health will only show up if you or someone on your team is in the boss lair. Once everybody is out of it, it will not show the boss amount of health. Each corner on this diamond is going to be 25% of its health. And every time you hit each corner or each 25% of its health, it will do 1 enragement cycle. This usually means that the boss is going to take reduced damage if you are shooting it, meleeing it, or throwing explosives at it. So it's almost not worth fighting the boss when it is in this enraged state. And after a specific amount of time, which usually isn't too long and depends on each boss, then it will get out of its enragement state and then take the full amount of damage that you can deal to it. Most bosses usually get enraged and run faster. They also hit for a little more damage, and they usually seem to act completely different. A lot of newbies don't seem to understand when the bosses are actually enraged, so make sure you are paying attention when I'm talking about each specific boss, because some of them do different movements and things like that. I will completely go over and cover that. But that should completely cover everything you need to know to get to the boss lair and what types of damages certain things do in this game. So our first boss we'll talk about is going to be the Butcher. Essentially, he is going to be the easiest boss in my personal opinion. He's going to be the most susceptible to rending damage, which means using an axe on him is going to be the best way to melee him to death. But he is also a very easy boss to sticky or throw dynamites at. So the first method that I said when bringing in consumables and killing bosses easily, that is going to work almost every time with the butcher. Now, let me show you his entry screech, cheaper than Twitch. Like I said, all the bosses will be doing this, and it makes it a very easy opportunity for you guys to throw your sticky bomb on them or just to hack and slash them very quickly. He has a few different attacks, one where he overhead swings on you, which does a lot of damage, one where he just swipes at you with his hook, and then another one where he throws a fireball at you. All of these can be dodged pretty easily, especially the fireball. When he starts throwing it, it makes a little cue, and then you can just go a 90 or 45 degree to the right or left of the direction he's facing, and that will usually cover you from his fireballs. His swiping attack is usually kind of hard to not get hit by because he usually only does it when you're very, very close to him. And then his overhead attack is similar to the swiping, where he's only really going to do it when you're close to him. However, if you are instantly running in the opposite direction, you won't usually get hit by him. So like I said, each boss has an enragement cycle once you hit 25% of his health, and this is what an enragement cycle is going to look like for the butcher. He starts flailing his arms around and he makes this loud screech and animation. He will continue to run around for a little bit, chasing you. But one pro tip that not a lot of people know about is if the butcher hits you in his enragement cycle, he will actually start running away from you. You will light on fire usually, but if he hits you and runs away from you, you have a decent opportunity to stop it. You don't need to keep running away from him after he hits you when he's enraged, because he essentially won't try and get you after that. A very nice thing about the butcher is that he also dies pretty easily to hammers, traumas, or most of the melees that we mentioned that you can bring into the game outside of the dusters, the knives, those things that don't hit for a lot of damage. You will be susceptible to it and die pretty quickly. You can pierce him with a pitchfork or a bayonet. You can also hit him with a hammer or a trauma. And then, like I said, the axes or rending damage is going to be the best thing to use on the butcher. But any of the in-world melees that you can find, even the worst one, which is the shovel, is actually pretty good against this butcher. When it comes to ammo types, he is the most susceptible to poison. So if you like bringing a suppressed nagant with poison in it, then he can take a lot of damage from this if you are shooting that at him. Incendiary is practically not going to do any extra damage to him, but other than that, he's going to be pretty easy to take down. So this is how I would personally fight him as a solo when using one of these good melees that I found in the game. With an axe or a hammer, he will take 2 hits and then go enraged, and by that time you can just run away from him or go out of the boss lair. He won't be able to attack you, and then he will make his screech again, which means he is not enraged. Then you're going to go back in, and as long as he is completely unenraged, then doing the same cycle will get him another 25%. So just keep doing this and repeating the process until he dies. And once the butcher dies, make sure you're not standing right on top of him, because he actually does do a last resort hit that can sometimes deal a lot of damage to you. And it looks like this. And a last tip is, if you really are annoyed of getting ignited and lit on fire from the butcher, you can throw a choke bomb towards him and his hook, and as long as it hits it, he will not have his fire on the hook for the rest of the fight. But that's pretty much everything you need to know about fighting and killing the butcher, and most of these boss fights are going to operate exactly the same. You take a good melee that they're susceptible to, one that they're not going to resist very well. Make sure you hit them 2 or 3 times, go out of the boss lair or run away from them when they are enraged, and then when they are not enraged, come back and do the same cycle a bunch of times. So let's move on to the spider. The spider is going to be very easy to fight, like the butcher as well, because most of the damage types and weapons you're going to be bringing for boss fighting anyways, he's going to be susceptible to pretty much all of them. But he is going to be the most susceptible, meaning that you want to take this if you have the choice. That is going to be blunt damage. So the in-world hammer is going to be the one you want to take if you know you have to fight the spider instead of the axe. As well, the traumas are going to be better than the talons on your guns, but it's not really that big of a difference when it comes to the hammer or the axes, the traumas or the talons. Both of these are going to do a lot of damage. And like I said with the butcher, even if you're using a shovel that you found in the game, it is still going to be very efficient at killing this boss. However, the spider can be pretty tricky if you don't understand its entry screech and the ability or opportunity you get to throw a sticky on it. So if you guys like using stickies for the bosses, like I said at the beginning of the video, then this is going to be one that you need to pay attention to. Make sure you do not allow any of the teammates into the boss lair other than you or whoever is using the sticky. For this example, if you are using the sticky, make sure you tell your teammates, don't go in there. You're going to be the first one in there. And the reason why is because when you go into the spider's boss lair, he's going to come up to whoever is in there. And it might be somebody that doesn't have the sticky if everyone's in there at the same time. So if you're the only one, he's going to come up to you. And when he does come up to you, he's going to do this. And that was his entry screech, but it also is the biggest opportunity for you to throw the sticky bomb at him and deal a lot of damage. Obviously, sticking a spider that's climbing all over the walls and the ceilings isn't always going to be easy, so you want to make sure you nail this throw right when you move into the boss lair, instead of having all your teammates in there and then you got to worry about the spider standing still for a split second, which he really doesn't do unless he's enraged for a quick second. And when he's enraged, he's going to take way less damage anyways. So this is your one opportunity when you're moving into the boss lair. Make sure you're by yourself and you should be good to throw this at him. If you're using the axes, the hammers, all of that is going to be the same as the butcher. Just go in for 2 to 3 hits, and then that will take 25% of his health. Go out or run away from him for the entire duration that he is in his enragement cycle, and repeat the process until he is dead. But the spider has a few different attacks. The first one being a little pierce/lunge with his hands at you. This is usually going to do a minimal amount of damage, around 25. So if you have small bars, it's going to take one of those each time he hits you. And then he's also got an attack where he throws a poison cloud at you. This poison cloud won't last too long, but it can be annoying when trying to run around the boss lair when he's enraged and kill him, essentially. But when he throws these at you, they're pretty similar to the fireballs that the butcher will throw periodically, but it's usually just when he has a line of sight on you but can't actually melee you, so he will throw some poison clouds at you. You're going to want to do the same thing with the fireballs though from the butcher. Just go in a 90-degree angle from wherever he is and you should be able to dodge them. And then his last attack is that he jumps on top of you. As a beginner, these can be very hard to predict, but as long as you're constantly moving, he will not be able to actually get you. He makes a loud screech like this. And that is the indicator that he is trying to jump on you. But like I said, just make sure you're moving around, especially when you hear this, and he ultimately won't be able to jump on you. If you want a really good way to kill the spider without meleeing, then think of taking incendiary in your guns. Like I said, I'm not a big fan of people on my team or in general shooting the bosses because it gives away your gun and the fact that you are already in position at the boss lair, and I don't think that's a good thing to give to the enemy teams for them to know what gun you have, especially. But if you have incendiary in any of the suppressed guns, then that can be an amazing method to kill this boss. He will die very, very quickly if you are using incendiary. I think it's 2 or 3 shots depending on which gun you're using with incendiary to one cycle him, meaning take 25% of his health after 2 shots of incendiary. It's absolutely crazy. If you're shooting him with any poison ammo, he's not going to take any additional damage, kind of like how the butcher won't take any additional damage if you're shooting incendiary at him. The last thing to know about the spider is that when he dies, sometimes he will run away and then fall somewhere else in the boss lair, and it won't be exactly where you hit him last to kill him. So that can kind of be a nuisance sometimes. So you have to make sure that when you kill the boss, you're kind of tracking him down, because sometimes he will run away from you and then die. That can be the most annoying thing, I would say, when fighting the spider, or when he just genuinely doesn't want to get off the walls and fight you. But other than that, in my opinion, these are the 2 easiest bosses to fight, just because you can pretty much use any melees that you can find in the game or bring on your guns or in your tool slots, and it genuinely is a easy boss fight for the butcher and the spider. The next 2, in my opinion, are going to be moving up in difficulty, especially for beginners. But we will talk about the hardest one last, and the next one will be the SCRAPBEAK. SCRAPBEAK isn't too bad when you get his patterns down and learn what not to do, which a lot of people still, even a lot of hours, don't understand how to fully and effectively take down SCRAPBEAK without wasting time and using your resources like a medkit or something like that. But essentially, SCRAPBEAK is going to be the most weak to piercing damage. So pitchforks, bayonets, or heavy attacks on riposte, any of the melees that we talked about earlier, like the saber or the katana heavy attacks, those are going to completely demolish this boss. If you're using a hammer or an axe, you are going to be pretty much shit out of luck, as it is very difficult to take a good amount of damage from him, so it's not even really worth it. If I find an axe or a hammer I do not use it on SCRAPBEAK as it's not worth it at all. But most of the time I'll either have throwing axes or spears, something like that, or a regular knife, which all have the potential to damage the boss pretty well, way better than a hammer or an axe, since he's not susceptible to rending or blunt damage. If you're just going to use the regular knife, hit him 2 times and then he will take a quick second and stop. You can move away and then go back for another melee, and every time you hit him, just bounce out away from him. He will do a quick swing and then go back for 2 more hits if the last time you only did 1. It takes a little longer, like I said, since it's a regular knife and it doesn't do a crap ton of damage, but it is piercing and sometimes the best thing you can use. So that is the pattern. Go up to him, hit him twice with your knife, let him chase you, go back to him, hit him once, and then move away again. He will throw his hand out to you to hit you, and then once he's done with that, go back, hit him 2 more times, move away. He will start to chase you, go back to him, hit him once, and then move away because he's going to hit you again. But you can dodge it if you are using my patterns as well. If you are throwing your axes or your spears at him and then going up, pulling them out, and just keep doing that process, that is a very good way to take him down effectively. However, something to note is if you're playing with teams and you guys are all fighting SCRAPBEAK at the same time, it can mess the pace up. So if you're using the method that I was just talking about with the regular knife stabbing 2 times, moving away 1 time, move away 2 times, move away, if you're doing that method and your teammates are also doing additional damage, it will mess up the flow of that, and essentially you will start getting hit more often than you won't, and it just isn't good. So if you're using the knife in a team, go up once and hit him, then move away, and just keep doing that while your teammates are doing whatever they're doing as well. Something to know about SCRAPBEAK exclusively though is that within the compound, he will take up all of the medkits, toolboxes, melee items, and all of the lanterns and bear traps. He will completely take all of those, so you will not find any of them unless they are a static melee spawn, meaning that spawns that melee in that specific spot every game on that map. Other than the static melee spawns around the map, which happen every game like I just said, then he will take it from the compound he is in. So meaning none of the houses outside of the boss lair will have any of those. But each enragement cycle, he drops a few items each time. But each of the enragement cycle means that he is going to drop a few of these if he is not burning at that specific time. SCRAPBEAK does take a lot of damage from the burn, but one thing to think about, which in my opinion is the pro tip in this specific boss, is to not burn SCRAPBEAK at all. Make sure you're turning off lanterns, because when he does go into his enragement cycle, he will swing and flail his arms and hit lanterns, start burning the stuff that he dropped as well as himself, and overall you just don't want to do that. Since the outside of the boss lair with SCRAPBEAK doesn't allow any medkits or melees or bear traps, lanterns, things like that, it is a very good thing to think about keeping those in the boss lair when he drops them. You want yourself and your team to have an abundance of medkits and things to use, while the enemies outside trying to attack the boss lair do not. So treat those as valuable resources. They can save you from using your own medkits, and the toolboxes can resupply you on some of the tools or consumables that you have open slots on. So just make sure that you're trying your best not to let SCRAPBEAK burn, because he will then inevitably burn the goodies that he drops on his enragement cycles. Another thing is when he is enraged, this is when you do not want to damage him at all. Any damage to SCRAPBEAK when he's in his enragement cycle, he will throw concertina around the compound. This, like the poison cloud from earlier in the spiders section, can just make it a very hard time moving around the compound to not get hit by him and ultimately trying to kill SCRAPBEAK. So try your best to not damage him when he's in his enragement cycle. Move away from him or go out of the boss lair like the other tactics while fighting the spider or the butcher. But overall, SCRAPBEAK has a few different attacks. He will lunge at you, hitting you with his melee. He will then throw a little bit of concertina at you if he can't reach you, and it's almost like you're mocking him because he can see you but he can't reach you. And same with the butcher and the spider, how the spider has its poison cloud that it'll throw at you when it can't reach you, and the butcher the same. It's fireball when he can't reach you. So this is kind of the only concertina that you should allow, because he's going to throw it at you. There's nothing you can do about it. But any of the extra concertina from him when he's enraged is totally uncalled for. And when you and your teammates are fighting SCRAPBEAK, you should make sure that it is just a known thing to not fight him when he's enraged. Let him get out of his enragement cycle and then go back, and he won't be throwing concertina everywhere when you damage him. Ultimately though, SCRAPBEAK is going to be the most susceptible to piercing damage. So the pitchfork that he drops sometimes in his enragement cycle with the amount of goodies that he drops is going to be one of your best bets to fight him. With the pitchfork, go up to him, heavy melee him twice, and then move back. He will swing at you, go back for a third, and that is one enragement cycle. But that's pretty much everything you need to know about SCRAPBEAK. In a team, most of these bosses are pretty easy to take down if you're all working together. But like I said, since I normally play solo, the hardest boss for me to deal with in this game is going to be the assassin, which is the last of the regular boss targets. The assassin's weakness is going to be blunt damage, so the hammer that you can find in the world is going to be the best way to kill him. There's a few things to know about the assassin, and that's when he does his entry screech, he will come up to you similar to like the spider will. So when you and your teammates are going into the boss lair to fight the assassin, make sure you guys are all standing close to each other. You want to be able to go in on his entry screech and melee him for a few seconds of easy opportunities. But if your teammates are spread around the boss lair, then he might go to somebody else, meaning that you and your other teammate that aren't close enough to the assassin and your third teammate won't be able to effectively get any melee damage onto the boss, which is kind of just killing time and potentially could get you killed while killing the boss. So make sure you and your teammates are going in at the same direction, same spot, and standing close to each other. And that is true for the whole entire assassin fight. If your teammates are constantly running after the assassin to go damage him or whatever, then it is going to make the boss fight a lot harder because you guys are going to be too spread out to all damage him at the same exact time. So big thing to pay attention to. Make sure you and your teammates are standing close together, waiting for the assassin to come to you guys. When he does pop up exactly like this is when he is going to take the most damage. If you guys are using blunt damage or your whole team is hitting him for a lot, then he will get staggered essentially, which means that he will go into his enragement cycle, but he will not be moving around. So he can just stay in the same spot while you and your teammates can keep applying extra damage to him. Even though he's in his enragement cycle, it won't matter. He will not be moving around. When most of the bosses will move around and you can't stop them from doing that when they're in their enragement cycle. However, with the assassin, you can do this and stagger him. If you aren't staggering him, hitting him for a lot of damage when he pops up in front of you and you don't hit him at all, he will go in for his first attack, which is a stabbing attack. And if you get hit from this, it'll take a good chunk of your health, close to about 30 to 40% of your health, and will leave you with a bleed. The assassin also has a ranged attack just like all of the other bosses, and this is also when he can't touch you or get super close to you. He will spawn on the ceiling or the walls, and he will throw a dagger at you, which will also take a good amount of your health, as well as leaving a bleed again. But the weird thing about the assassin that can be pretty tricky to deal with as a newer player or somebody that doesn't understand it is his clones. So when the assassin is in his enragement cycle, he will throw out a few clones. He has 2 clones that will come close to you and pretty much have no HP. As long as you damage them at all by shooting them, punching them, meleeing them in general, it will take care of these clones and they will dissipate. But the thing is if the clones get close enough to you without you damaging them first, they will explode on you and your whole screen will have a bunch of bugs going everywhere. And the big part here is once the assassin comes back without his clones and actually spawns for his normal stab attack, even if you hit him, he will still hit you. But normally with his regular attack, if you don't have all the bugs on your screen because you didn't just get hit by his clones, his normal attack, if you hit him or do any damage to him, he will not be able to hit you with his stab attack. So it's kind of like making sure when he's just coming up to you, ready to stab you with no bugs on your screen, you want to make sure you're doing a little bit of damage to him before he does that, because otherwise he's going to hit you. But when his clones hit you in his enragement cycle and then gets bugs all over your screen, there's nothing you're going to be able to do when he spawns in front of you to stab you. So other than running away or getting out of the boss lair in this specific cycle, it's not really going to be super efficient just to run from him. A lot of the times you're still going to get hit if the bugs are on your screen and he's trying to stab you. A good thing to do is to pull out your med kit, as if you melee with your med kit, you will punch. But the big thing here is that it doesn't take a lot of your stamina. So typically at the beginning of this video, I talked about using a stamina shot for fighting all of these bosses. However, if you are out of a stamina shot and using the stamina system that's baked into the game, then using your melee punch with your med kit is going to be the best way, because it doesn't do a lot of damage and it doesn't take a lot of stamina, but these clones don't have hardly any HP anyways. So when they come up to you, just punch each of them once. That will get rid of them, and then the next time the assassin comes up to you to stab you, as long as you damage him, he won't be able to stab you. So that is how essentially you are going to fight the assassin. Go up to him, and if you can get some good damage down, stagger him with your team. Keep doing that, get past his enragement cycles with his clones by punching them with your med kit or your melee or whatever you need to use to be able to get rid of the clones, and then just keep doing that cycle. And if you never get to stagger him, then do a good bit of damage to him. Once the clones come out, do the same thing where you're punching them with your med kit, and it should be a pretty easy cycle for you guys to take the assassin down. One thing to note is that the poison damage actually does a good amount to him. So if you have any poison in your guns, that's going to be very, very good. But like the spider, he is going to be extremely susceptible to incendiary rounds or fire. If you can find any lanterns around the compound to maybe throw a throwing knife at and come and pick up the knife later when the fire's gone, but just creating areas of fire that he has to go through is a very good way to apply some extra damage to him passively while he moves around the boss lair himself. Or poison clouds, that can work too, but that makes it a little harder for you as the poison clouds stay for a while. The fire usually doesn't, and it goes away pretty quickly. If you have any lanterns in the boss lair, you can pick those up and throw them in front of you while you are also fighting the assassin. But overall, he is the hardest boss to fight, especially as a solo if you're not bringing a really, really good melee or finding one at the supply points before you get to the boss lair. A lot of the time, it takes me the longest to fight the assassin because I might have some throwing axes or a regular knife. It's not going to cut it super quickly, but it is somewhat decent, so sometimes you just have to roll with that, and I usually try not to fight the assassin anyways. But in teams, it shouldn't be too difficult to take out any of these bosses. If you're sticking to the guide and you picked up on everything I was explaining, then killing any of these bosses shouldn't be that big of a deal. And if you're playing in teams, I can't stress this enough, make sure you and your teammates are on the same page, and at least 2 of you should try and get the boss down as fast as possible. It's very essential to be able to hold the boss lair so you can kill the boss and then listen for enemy footsteps coming in. You can defend and everything once you kill the boss. It's a lot easier while it's not in the boss lair moving around trying to fight you guys while you are trying to also defend the people outside, but you don't have any way to move out because they're really close to the doors or the entries or whatever. It's very important. Make sure you and your teammates on the same page, trying to get the boss down as fast as possible, and one person should always be checking to see the color at the top. Make sure it is white, and if it is red, unless the boss is very, very low, try to get out of the lair before it gets super hairy. That's essentially everything you guys need to know about fighting all of the regular boss targets. The 3 differences, however, with the wild targets is the fact that they have less HP than regular bosses. They drop 1 bounty token instead of 2, and then they also drop a scarce trait, meaning that it is only a trait you're going to be able to get in the game. They're also going to be dropping Necromancer, which is technically not a scarce trait, but other than that, all of the traits that he is going to drop are going to be scarce, meaning you can only find them in game. So it is a good reward to go for these wild targets. They are only going to give you 1 token. However, that scarce trait is usually pretty good. One of the scarce traits is going to be Berserker, which is actually going to double your melee damage, and that can actually exponentially increase the ability you have to kill bosses, and it is going to work wonders if you have Berserker. You can even have a bad melee like Dusters and still be efficient when fighting bosses. But the main trait that you guys are going to be looking for is Death Cheat, and that's just going to keep your hunter from actually dying completely when you actually do die and lose the game. So you go back to the main menu with your hunter, the same traits, all of that except for your loadout. You will lose all your guns, tools, and consumables. But yes, these wild targets are definitely worth going for if you can and have the time. If it's not too far off the beaten path, I definitely recommend you going for the wild targets because of the dropped scarce trait that they're inevitably going to drop when you kill them. And like I said, they don't take as long because they don't have as much HP. However, they only do give you 1 boss token. But then the last thing to know about the wild targets is that you do not actually have to go up to them and interact with them to banish them. Essentially, the last person to damage them, to kill them, is going to be the one or the team that gets the banishment, and it will banish instantaneously, and then showing the bounty token as well as the scarce trait that dropped right after. So just make sure if he's very, very low, you and your team try their best to focus on getting 1 or 2 more shots to kill the boss, so you guys get the banishment and somebody else isn't snagging it from you with a sniper from 200 meters. And the same is true with ROTJAW, which I will preface again when I'm talking about ROTJAW, which now let's talk about HELLBORNE. HELLBORNE is exclusively on Mammoth's Gulch and not on DeSalle, Stillwater, or Lawson Delta. Essentially, all you're going to want to do to find HELLBORNE is go into Dark Site. When you start the match, if there's not 2 boss targets at the top left, then that means that there is the potential for there to be HELLBORNE or ROTJAW if you're playing on the other maps. But with that, you're going to want to go into Dark Site and just listen around for his noises that he makes. It's pretty easy to hear, but here is an example. You're just going to want to follow that direction, and that will lead you to where HELLBORNE is. One thing to note about these wild targets detection ranges is that they're going to be doubled. It is going to be close to 100 meters where you can see the color to see if there's any enemies camping around or just interfering with the boss. It's a lot better because they're outside, so it's a little easier for you to find out if there's any enemies around. It can be kind of easy to camp these things with snipers from a distance or whatnot, so that's why the detection range is that much bigger. However, HELLBORNE won't be shown on the map until somebody starts fighting him or until you do. This is going to be a pretty hard boss for you guys to fight if you are solo, but if you are in a team, this shouldn't be hard at all. He's different in the sense where he actually doesn't have an enragement cycle. When you take 25% of his health, he actually doesn't change in his fighting tactics. He still only has 2 attacks, and that is throwing 4 fireballs in succession at you, which is easy to dodge, just going 90 degrees left or right from where he's standing to you, or he will run up to you and explode in your face, dealing a lot of fire damage to you, taking even a few of your health bars. And while he explodes, he throws about 6 mortars from where he's standing around the compound. So if you're super close to him, you're probably gonna get ignited and lose a bunch of health bars for him exploding next to you. And if you're far away from him, there's a decent chance that one of these mortars might actually end up flying and hitting you. Regardless, he's not that hard to deal with. Just make sure when he explodes, you're not right next to him and you have some cover. And when he starts throwing his fire bombs at you, he will be stationary, so you can move, like I said, left or right from where he's standing, and you should be able to dodge them pretty well. However, with update 2.3, the developers changed how explosives work around fire. So instantaneously, if you throw a dynamite into fire, it will blow up right when it hits it. And since the HELLBORNE is made of fire, then if you throw any sticky or big dynamite bundle at him, it will instantaneously blow up when it hits him. So if you're playing by yourself, throwing a sticky at him might not be the best thing. If you're somewhat close to him, you're gonna have to make sure maybe you have pitcher or that you're at a far distance while you're throwing it at him. Something to note about HELLBORNE as well is that if you do want to shoot him, he has a weak spot right below his neck. It looks like this, and is definitely worth shooting at if you really need to get some extra damage on him. But the best way to fight him outside of throwing dynamites at him and potentially one-tapping him with the big dynamite bundle is still going to be melee. Even though he's going to ignite you and put you on fire, as long as you have a stamina shot going and your teammates are willing to help you as well, if you guys have good melees like axes or hammers, he is going to die very, very quickly. You just have to make sure you're not going to panic and you're constantly chasing after him. He can be kind of glitchy and gimmicky when you are meleeing him, and he kind of almost like moonwalks away. So you have to make sure you are not missing any of your swings, especially if there's only one person meleeing, because you probably will die and completely be red skull. So like I said, make sure you have one of the really good melees and your teammates are helping you. Usually it's pretty good to have everybody have a good melee and go in and fight him. He will die pretty quickly. You can also all have penny shot derringers, or even if just one of you guys has penny shot derringers, you will almost take over half of his HP just by shooting the 2 shots. But if all of you guys have penny shot derringers, you can take him down very, very quickly and not even really get hurt by him. And if you are fighting the boss and you're meleeing him but your teammates aren't, they should at least be shooting at him. The thing with HELLBORNE is he is outside anyways, and people are going to be alerted with his icon coming up on their screen that somebody is fighting them. So it doesn't really matter if you are shooting him. However, it would be ideal if everyone on your team could take a good melee like a hammer or an axe that they've found or have on their gun already and go melee him all at the same time to get him down completely. You can also damage him with chokes and stuff like that if you have choke bombs, or using choke arrows from a hand crossbow. Those are all good and well. They will damage him a little bit. However, that's probably not the best way to kill him. But that's pretty much everything you guys need to know about fighting Hellborne. ROTJAW is the last boss we're going to be talking about in this video and is going to be the second wild target in this video game. ROTJAW is going to exclusively be on DeSalle, Stillwater, and Lawson Delta. So it will not spawn on Mammon's Gulch. That is only for Hellborne. To find ROTJAW though, you want to go around water and go into Darkside to find its traces. It is going to look differently than going into Darkside and seeing a regular clue. It's going to look like this. But once you see this, you can tell that it's not the same as a clue. It's more of like a spore that spews out liquid or bubbles. As long as it's not a super small area of water, then she probably will have a good chance to spawn. Something to note with ROTJAW and Hellborne is that it can only spawn on single bounty contracts. So that means if there's 2 bosses, then that will not allow for any of the wild targets to spawn. But the icon by the boss target that is normally there when there's 2 boss targets or 1 will not show up for ROTJAW or Hellborne until you discover them. And with ROTJAW, discovering her is a little bit different than discovering Hellborne. Like I said, you have to find these traces that are close to the water, and once you interact with it, it will then show ROTJAW at the top right over here. So like I said, you find one of the traces and then it will allow you to show that there is in fact ROTJAW on the map. But a big benefit to actually examining one of the traces is going to be that potentially there are times where you're going to walk through the map, not grab any of ROTJAW's traces, but you're actually going to walk by ROTJAW and the detection zone, which like I said is around 100 meters. If you haven't got any of the traces, that means you didn't discover that ROTJAW was even on the map, at least when it comes to your HUD. So make sure if you do see a trace, you try to grab it so you can at least use the detection range when you are near ROTJAW to find out if there are enemies within that range. But this trace will essentially point in the direction that ROTJAW is in. So if you pull up your map and aim exactly with that direction and draw a line, like I said, just aim yourself up with where the trace is spewing, and then all of the big areas of water are potential spawns for ROTJAW. But then when you get close to her and you go into Darkside, you can then start listening for where she's at, kind of like Hellborne. Here by this extract. Once you get close enough to hear her, you can start creeping into her direction and try to potentially throw your dynamites over her, but you cannot throw them at her and on top of her. But this, and then you wait for that diamond at the end to be above her, so when it throws, it comes out and explodes exactly where that diamond is. If you were to, however, sticky her by throwing the sticky, and she didn't get alerted and going into the water before you did this, once you hit her, she's just going to go into the water. The sticky's not going to do anything because it's going to hit the water. So generally speaking, it's not the greatest to throw dynamites and things at ROTJAW, and it's very tricky because when you get super close, it will just get skittish and go into the water, and then your dynamites aren't going to do too much. So you need to creep up slowly and then air burst if you want to do any initial damage to ROTJAW. ROTJAW is going to be different than the regular bosses and Hellborne. She has a basic bite, which will do 50 damage if she gets close enough and is able to actually hit you. And this essentially will come up with a bunch of bubbles when she starts to surface. She will then try to come close to you, and then if you are standing right in her way, she will achieve the bite. This is usually pretty easy to dodge. In all of this fight, you're typically just going to want to look for her bubbles and go 90 or 45 degrees to the right or left of those bubbles. I usually like to do 90 because when you start going in 45-degree angles from where the bubbles are, it can get pretty close, especially with the bite. She can kind of move left and right a little bit with her neck to then actually attack you. So make sure you're just kind of going 90 degrees to the right or the left when you see the bubbles. Now, when you see bubbles like this, that means she's going to be coming in for a bite. Then when you see bubbles like this, it's actually her heavy attack, and it is stationary for a second. The bubbles start to ramp up very loud, and you can tell it is going to be a heavy attack. She ends up doing 125 damage and knocks you on your ass. So this is going to be very, very important for you guys to not hit. If you see these bubbles and this loud noise coming, you know that she's going to do a charge attack on you. So make sure you are completely running to the right or left 90 degrees. It is very essential that if you get hit and you're below 125, you will die. If you're a solo and you're doing this, make sure that you're not in the water at all unless you're above 125 HP, because she actually can't do any more than 125 HP. And then her last attack, she has a swimming bite. And this is when she surfaces and you can see her whole entire body. You can't see her bubbles per se. You can only see her body. And if you get close enough to her, she will bite you for about 50 damage. So like I said, a regular bite, a charging attack, and then a swimming bite that she can do to you. And both of the bites will do about 50 HP, while the big charge attack will do 125. If you're using the hammer or the axe, those are usually going to be the best ways to kill ROTJAW. Go 90 degrees from her. When she does come up and bites or whatever, you're going to want to go back to her before she goes back under the water to melee her or shoot her or do whatever when she's most vulnerable. However, if she's above 50% HP and you melee her after one of these attacks, she will actually electrocute you and it will drain all of your stamina. So make sure when you are fighting ROTJAW, you have a stamina shot. If you don't have a stamina shot, this can be a lot harder to fight. However, once you get her below 50% HP, she then goes into a frenzy mode where she drops off the cage that she has on her, and then she spews a bunch of electrical pools out around the area. Just give it 10 to 20 seconds and all these electrical pools will go away. But essentially, if you touch these, they will completely drain all of your stamina, and it just really sucks. So it's not worth being around it. Let your stamina regen if you don't have a stamina shot going, and then go back into the water and try and fight her when the electrical pools are gone. When she's below 50% HP as well, she will not shock you unless you are absolutely right on top of her after you melee. So like I said, if she's above 50% HP and has the cage on and hasn't hit her frenzy yet at 50% HP, then she will electrocute you if you are close after hitting her. So just make sure you're at the front or back of her when you're meleeing, and try not to stand right in the middle of her because she will leave that pool behind and then inevitably take all of your stamina if it hits you. These pools also do damage you just a little bit, but it's not the end of the world. So essentially, it's going to be pretty easy when fighting all of these bosses in the game, and especially when they are range attacking you, or in this case with ROTJAW, when she is trying to attack you, you're just gonna want to go 90 degrees to the right or left from where she is surfacing. Overall, my last few takeaways or thoughts are going to be that meleeing the bosses are going to be the best way to kill them most of the time. Throwing dynamites or things like that can also be one of the better ways, but they're not always available. So it completely depends on what you're bringing into the game. But if you don't have a melee on your gun or a really good explosive, then try to go to the supply points to find a hammer or an axe, depending on who you are fighting. Another thing, try to make sure your teammates are all joining in on it, and at least one person is checking for the color in the detection range to make sure that there are no enemy teams moving in at that moment. This was a long one, and if you guys appreciate it or made it to the end of the video, I'd really appreciate if you could leave a like, comment, and subscribe. I do have a lot more of these type of informative and entertaining videos coming out in the near future with these new events and new updates for Hunt Showdown for the foreseeable future. And as well, like I said earlier in the video, if you could come by my Kick, Twitch, or YouTube as a multi-stream Wednesday through Sunday, 12 p.m. to 8 p.m. EST. And yeah, we're trying to build up the Kick so we can potentially get partnered and get hourly pay. Really appreciate if you guys could support me over on there. And with that being said, I appreciate you guys checking this video out. I hope you guys have a good rest of your day, and I will see you in the bayou.